My name is Kutalani Kumalo. I am the media consultant for the South African Council of Churches. I'd like to thank you all for making the time to be with us. Before we get started, could I just ask for us to observe some protocols? So, firstly, for all of our participants who are online, please make sure that your cameras are off and that your microphones are muted so that there is no background noise that would interrupt the flow of our program this morning. And could I ask for all of our guests who are in the room to make sure that their cell phones are on vibrate or silent so that we don't have any calls or messages coming through as we go along. My job this morning is very simple. I'll just introduce you, take you through who our panelists are, and then I would hand over to Reverend Chikane, who would take us through the overall report back. So in the room this morning, we have the Reverend Chikane, who is the former South African Council of Churches General Secretary and Vice President. He's in his capacity as the moderator of the Churches Commission on International Affairs for the World Council of Churches. He is joined today by Reverend Nzwandile Molo, the Director, Church Liaison and Community.
As Frank Chikane, former Vice President of the SACC, former General Secretary, and an emeritus pastor of the Apostolic Faith Mission of South Africa. That's where it goes for now until I get to the WCC, and then it becomes a WCC matter. So I just thought it's important to make that clear, because I don't want somebody to say, no, this matter was not considered in our courts. That's the first thing I want to say. The second thing is that for us, we have read the reports. You have reports about Israel-Palestine. The first report is the Amnesty International report, which says us Israel and they make a very clear legal argument why it is a apartheid and a crime against humanity. And they made it very clear. It's not ambiguous, it's scientific. And then you've got Bethlehem. I always pronounce it wrongly. It's Bethlehem. This is a Jewish human rights group which has expressed it from that perspective, and it says the regime of Jewish supremacy from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. This is apartheid. That's what it says. And the third one, which I didn't know it's as thick as this, but I read a summary. This is from the Human Rights Watch. You remember they went on the media and they said a threshold crossed. Israeli authorities and the crime of apartheid and persecution, which means they've crossed the line, basically. And for us as South Africans, I would like to say, whilst Bethlehem is saying this is apartheid, we would like to say our experience of the last week is that this is more than apartheid. Actually, it's critical to make that clear. And we met both sides. Just for record, I made sure we request meetings both from the Palestinian Authority, that's the state, Palestinian state, and the Israeli state. We communicated, the SACC helped us to communicate with their embassies here to ask for meetings because we wanted to meet both sides. We also wanted to meet human rights groups on both sides. We also met communities, and this is where, for me, it's critical about communities. We went to communities that are threatened. The first one is Silwan community in Jerusalem. And I will speak to that, but you will see the map the community gave us of the threats against them, and the red spots are where their houses have already been taken and occupied. And the blue spots are houses that the Israeli settlers have determined to take from them. And then there is the community of Sheikh Jarrah. You'll assist me in pronouncing it correctly. And this particular community, it's critical because they lost their houses in 1948. They still have keys for their houses. Some came from Haifa, some West Jerusalem, and other parts of the country. When I visited Israel in Palestine, Israel in 2015, I was taken by the principal of the Bethlehem Bible College to his home, that side of the wall. He's one of the Arab Israelis who kept his home the other side. And then he took me to houses of the others who have been removed. They have the keys, the houses are there, and they've been occupied since 1948. So they moved to East Jerusalem. That was Jordanian territory at that point before 67. The war happens in 1967. Israel occupies East Jerusalem. So they are now under the Israeli authority. And then they come to them and say, no, the Jordanians gave them land and built some houses. The UN assisted them as refugees. Now you are inside where you ran away from. And then they are told, in terms of the law passed by Knesset in 1972, that the Jewish Israelis have the right to claim land which they believe belong to their forefathers or whatever the case may be. In some cases, it's the Israeli Settler Association that makes the claims. And in some of the claims, you can associate the settler with the land, particularly. It's a general rule. And so they come to claim that land in Sheikh Jarrah. We went to meet the community there. We talked to them. They briefed us. And they say they've lost the case because when you go to court, like in an apartheid system, the apartheid laws are used against you. In this particular case, they've got a law that says you can claim it, but they can't claim their houses in Haifa and West Jerusalem because the law only applies to Jewish Israelis, not to Palestinians or Arab Palestinians. And because of that, you can see the design of apartheid. Then there is the ethnic cleansing in this area so that they turn it into a Jewish environment. And the same with the Sheikh Jarrah. We just picked up two because we couldn't get to all the other communities. When you move around, which we met with the organizations that deal with prisoners, and they are using administrative detention, which is our preventative detention. You remember they declared a state of emergency, locked up a lot of our comrades in Motabi without trial. Now, in your case, we can go to court and go and contest that. But in their case, it's the military court. So we used to go to an apartheid civilian court and you could get lawyers there. In this one, it's a military court. So it's the soldiers who arrest you, who put you, it's almost like a captured soldier in a sense, or it's not citizens. And so they make judgment. And when you appear there in court, the lawyer who explained this, who deals with these cases, was quite extraordinary. When you appear at the court, they say, no, we have secret information that you are a threat to the state, but we can't reveal the secret information. So the lawyer can't also get the information because it's secret. So they pass judgment that you continue staying in jail. There's somebody there, I don't have the name now, who has been under the administrative detention for 12 years, has not tried or that. And that's why I say it's more than apartheid, because at least we went to a civilian court, even if it was apartheid laws. In this case, you end up with a soldier. That's the person who determines what you do. In terms of movements, the Palestinians are restricted from A to E. I've now learned it. You say they are classified. You either belong to A area, B area, C area, D area, and E area. One of them determines what rights you have. And I'm told that if you are A, you are the worst. So for you to move within Palestine, you need to cross control points, checkpoints, and you must have a permit to move from one area to another. Now, we had Bantustans here, but hey, man, we used to move around and get to the Bantustan from one to the other. They didn't even ask for a permit. You did get a sign that says you are entering Muputatswana, but there was no point there, and there was no soldier who checked on you. And so for us to move from Bethlehem to Ramallah, you go through a number of checkpoints and they check you. And the person who drives you with a Palestinian must have the right ID to move around. So in one instant, we took 1.5 hours intense state of 30 minutes because this man was avoiding the checkpoints that will not allow him to go in. We met with the patriarch, the Greek Orthodox Church patriarch. You'll see it in the statement. He is the most senior church leader. There was an authority given to Jordan to protect the holy sites. And when Israel took over, they passed a law to protect those holy sites. And it's Jewish, it's Islam, it's Christian in that Jerusalem precinct. And lately, you've got extremist Jewish groups that go there to violate all the guarantees. And we get it from the patriarch himself. And he is, there are statements from the WCC, you can Google them and read them, but the rights that were protected about the holy sites in East Jerusalem are being violated daily. The properties are being taken. And we went to the old city there and they showed us a facility of the churches which has been taken by extremist settlers, and the churches can't go in and use that facility. And we're talking to you about an experience of one week or going to all those places. I just want to say we met also the Israeli group of very informed people. Interestingly, it's two former Israeli ambassadors in South Africa. They are very interesting. They came out of South Africa when back changed, which means you can't be in South Africa and for 4 years and go back and pretend like there's nothing wrong there. And they gave us a thorough briefing from a Jewish perspective, numbers, statistics, and the message is clear, and you can Google them. We'll give you the names of those two former ambassadors. They are saying that the occupation of Palestine is a threat to the future of the Jews, and that it is not representing them as Jews, the treatment of Palestinians, both inside Israel and outside. Even those who are inside, who are supposed to be citizens, their citizenship is defined differently from the Jewish citizen. And when you apply for a permit to build, they just don't give you the permit. If you are an Arab Israeli, it takes ages. And when you are a Jew, you apply, you get the permit. And if you build without a permit, they demolish it. They demolish the house. But in Silwan, where there's an illegally built Jewish structure they are using, it stands, even if you go to court and say this structure is illegal, but they will demolish the Palestinian one next to it and say it is illegal. You can't explain apartheid better than that. You know. Lastly, I would like to say, unfortunately, we have not had a response from the Israeli embassy about asking for meetings. I've said this morning that if they gave us the meeting, we will go back and go and talk to them. We're waiting. So it's not the end. The fact that we have come back without the meetings doesn't mean it's the end, because you can't talk to one side and find peace. But on the Palestinian side, they gave us a hearing. We met the mayor of Ramallah. We then met the chief of justice, which is your chief justice here. We met the foreign minister. Ultimately, we met the prime minister. As you know, the president is not well. So we thought we would pay him a courtesy visit and go and say prayers there. But the prime minister was the person ultimately. And when you listen to them, the two-state solution was agreed upon about 25 years ago. It's a long time ago. Since then, more land has been taken out of Palestine by Israeli settlers. And the more you listen to them, the more you realize that Israel by default is actually destroying the two-state solution. And the only solution is going to be a one-state solution, because it's either you colonize people and be a state with colonial subjects, or you become an open society and everybody participates in the politics and elections and etc. And I think in their enthusiasm, especially the extremist Jewish groups and Zionist groups who want to clean the place and make it Israel without Palestinians, it's going to create a situation where they become colonizers of the place and permanent occupation of people who have no rights. And when a prime minister says to you, because I was saying, but if they are threatening people with eviction, what do you do as a Palestinian state? He says, I need permit from Israel to move from one point to another. I can't just go there as prime minister. I need permission to go there. And that tells you that even the Palestinian Authority does not have authority to actually exercise the rights. Can I just say one thing, and my colleagues will speak to this because it's quite an experience for me. If a Jewish Israeli commits a crime in Palestine, the Palestinian police can arrest that person. They must take that person, hand that person over to Israel. But if a Palestinian gets arrested in Israel, they charge you and prosecute you there. But it's not only that. In terms of international law, you can't detain people from the occupied area and go and try them in your country and keep them in your prisons. But most of those prisoners are there on the other side. And so you can get it from the Amnesty International details there if you want to test them. I just want to conclude by saying there's no way in which that system will be sustainable, to use the Jewish friends' language, and that peace cannot be attained with 55 years old occupation that still continues. No rights. You meet 55-year-old people who say, I was born colonized, I'm still colonized. I was born occupied, I'm still occupied, I have no rights. The world can't allow this to happen. And we have concluded, the three of us, the world is hypocritical. I'm dealing with Ukraine now as a moderator of the Churches Commission, and clearly Ukraine is a victim of the superpowers. I've learned something new, that there are those who are nuclear powers and those who are covered by nuclear powers. I discovered I'm not covered. And so all the people who are covered or own nuclear weapons produce arms, but the arms are never used on their territory. It's used amongst those of us who are not covered. And Ukraine is this theater. But the difference with Ukraine and Israel, Palestine, is that if it happens to Ukraine and it's Europe, all the sanctions will descend, everything. The world will turn against them. But if Israel does it, nothing happens. And that's clear hypocrisy, it's racism. So I've concluded the world's politics are run on racist basis. I thank you. You have a sanitizer.
I don't know if this is on, is it?
Yeah,
Just to... Okay. Yeah, thanks, Reverend Chikane. I think the summary report by Reverend Chikane is near complete, and there's very little to add except that to endorse and say that is our considered view, all of us, that situation is more than more than apartheid. And therefore, that throws the ball in the court of the international community to decide what it wants to do with apartheid. And thankfully, there is a precedent. So the world doesn't come at apartheid as something they've never seen before. They have seen it in this country, and there are ways and means that it has been dealt with in the past. Just to say that one of the tricks that we found used by the State of Israel in any attempt to not only declare this situation apartheid, but also to address it, is a term called anti-Semitism. In other words, if you criticize the policies of Israel, such as we are doing, that translates to anti-Semitism. And one of the things that have inspired us in the ways in which the people of Palestine respond to their occupation, and we interacted with churches a lot, and they framed a strategy that says we love Israel, but we also resist the occupation. And so I think the world struggles to accept the possibility that you could love a state like Israel and still resist it. And so I think that part of what seems to be at play is that particularly those countries in the north seem to be plagued by a memory of their own guilt with regard to what they've done with Israel, and therefore are very easy to guilt trip into that mode. It is different with Africa. I think Africa, we've never colonized or oppressed anybody, or participated in the Holocaust in the way that it was done. So we do not carry that baggage in a sense. And so we find no problem in saying there are atrocities here, and they have to be called out and responded to at the same time that we can affirm that we do love the people of Israel, we love the Jewish people, faith we've inherited from the people of Israel. So it is unthinkable that we could hate Israel in the way that the term anti-Semitism seems to suggest, and we just see that as a vaccine, if you like, to protect Israel against legitimate critique against its policies, but more especially against actions taken to remedy that situation. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. As Babu Mosenthal has just said, the summary report given by Babu Chikane represents the journey that we all encountered as we visited for the last week. The thing that I just want to amplify without making this briefing a religious briefing is the fact that there is a clear understanding that part of a particular contribution that needs to be had is from the faith communities themselves, because part of the identity of the Holy Land is how it perceives itself in relation to the three major religions. And there is a call that goes out to say part of the contribution towards a just peace must include what communities of faith are able to contribute in that journey. And that makes us be alert, and perhaps from the faith positions of the churches in South Africa, to accept two things. One is that as part of the world community, this church community of South Africa has benefited from relationships with the Church International and the Communities International in its own fight against our own apartheid experience, and that therefore calls upon us as the Christian community to find our particular contribution that we must make in order to help Israel to discover the truth that those who are Israeli, who worked for the purpose of communicating the Israel that they based on the nature of the other. Got people that we communicate to is that wirelessly for peace with the Palestinians. They can emerge a beautifully witnessed and message of finding each other as human beings under the belief of a God of justice that allows all of us then to become inspired again, not only by the past of the Holy Land experience, but by the future it possesses as it begins to communicate to us the boundary crossing that allows us to see a God of justice as the unifier that brings us together as people. And therefore the Holy Land does not only gives us good news of the past, but it also gives us good news into the future, because through those definitions of what is possible, despite the last 74 years of struggle, something beautiful can emerge in the Holy Land. And linked to that is the truth that we want to communicate. I know that the popular image of the Palestinian people are extremists that simply want to go out there and kill anybody and kill themselves. There are two images that come. One image comes from the mayor of Ramallah, who said to us in no uncertain terms, we do not want to die for Palestine. We want to live for Palestine. Our commitment is to life. Our commitment is not to death. We want to convince our young people that there is life worth living in and being a Palestinian, so that our young people don't think that they must leave Palestine in order for them to have a better future, but they can commit themselves not as an act of sacrificing their future in terms of life and giving up their life for Palestine, but to invite young people and everybody to work committedly for a life worth living with dignity in Palestine. The other image that we want to communicate with the world is that, in a narrow sense, as a people of faith who are Christian, there are many Christians in the land who are now learning to live with the possibility that they might be extinct. They believe that they won't be. They are committed to keeping the message of Christ alive in the Holy Land. But they face the reality that with everything that is happening, their own relevance in that society is under threat, if not their existence. It is important, therefore, for those of us who follow the gospel of Christ to be able not only to reach out to everybody in the base of their human dignity, which is critical and very important, but also to reach out to our Palestinian Christians who are there seeking to be witnesses of a Jesus Christ who brings all things new. And therefore, we must, as the Christian community, begin to work directly with our Christian Palestinians who are able to remind us again of the commitment they have to Jesus Christ and the vision Jesus Christ have for a new world where all of us can live with dignity. And it is on that basis that we commit to engage our own churches in this country to say, let us understand not only the caricatures that are in the popular media or the images that we have of Palestinians. Let us begin to engage with them so that we know them as human beings created in the image of God, and a God who is community. A wonderful Palestinian theologian reminded us that God is Trinity, that God is one who lives in community. So if we are going to be people of the world that seeks to work for justice, we must remember we are a people who live in a God who is community, because our God is a Trinitarian God. And that God then demands of us to live with respect, dignity, and justice with everybody else. And our work, therefore, must be to look at our brothers and sisters in the church, to say to them, how can we build a coalition based on our own experience and traditions, not only to galvanize the church in this country, but galvanize the church internationally, to begin to be that voice that says, if Christ is the bringer of life for all, not in every part of the world must experience that life-giving experience of God, and we must share that with dignity and with love for one another. And that is what we wish to engage our church leaders to work with and commit themselves into, so that the people of Palestine don't feel that they're left alone. That we, as Christians and as people of South Africa, have left not only to live through apartheid, but learn to coalesce and engage with people throughout the world, to work together and say to all of us, how can we put pressure on those who can make a most significant impact in the change of the dynamics? There's been a call throughout with our visit that those who've got the power to make a difference, the US and Europe, are not playing their part. And perhaps there's a conversation to be had of how we can all play our part, so that the US becomes a contributor towards a just peace rather than a preserver of the occupiers, and therefore begin to work with Europe, so that Europe is helped to release itself from the guilt of the past, but begin to make a contribution into building a just and a life with dignity for all who live in the Holy Land. We have no particular interest to impugn the dignity of any Jewish people. We have lived in this country to our own struggle with people of diverse backgrounds. We have no intention to make other people feel they're less than human, but we have a commitment to elevate those whose dignity has been trampled upon. And we believe occupation in its current expression is a trampling on the dignity of others. And that is a trampling on the image of God as we come to understand it. Thank you very much.
I'm going to hand over back to you just to complete the information. We asked these two ambassadors whether we can be public. They said yes. So it's Alon, A-L-O-N, Liel, L-I-E-L. And the other, it's Ilan, Baruch, B-A-R-C-H. The other thing I wanted to say, Baba Molo has just said it, is the patriarch said, if the United States made a decision today, their pain will come to an end. And that tells you where the power is. And I just want to say, Kutalani, that when I was in Iraq, I was surprised. Christians are a minority of minorities there. But the government, up to the president, was asking us as the WCC to help them. And then we discovered why. The point is, the countries that are causing them trouble in the main are Christian. And that's how I got to understand it there. And when we were in Palestine, Israel, now meeting these ambassadors, Jewish voices, they were looking at us as Christians to help solve this problem. And then it became clear that the Christian countries that support them are the problem. And so the Christian community has a much more greater responsibility to deal with these issues. Lastly, I just want to say there was an appeal on us to say you had an anti-apartheid movement that mobilize the world against apartheid until these big powers ended up accepting the reality. Wouldn't you be the people who should do that as South Africa? And we left there having accepted the challenge. And we believe that the only way to end this pain is to mobilize the people, the citizens of those countries, to take a stand like the anti-apartheid movement did. We need another anti-apartheid movement on Israel and Palestine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all of our religious leaders. We've come to the time where we can take some engagement, some questions. We've got some questions that are on the Zoom platform. I'd like to start with those. Some are partial comments going into some quick questions. And then from there, we can move then into some of the questions from any of our participants here in the room. Firstly, there's a question from Firoza who says, we welcome this report from the SACC. In the face of these facts, it is important to have the leadership of the faith-based organizations in the intensification and strengthening of the international solidarity movement. We look forward to this leadership from specifically the SACC and the SA Palestine Solidarity Movement. Her question then is, can we establish a working committee with the faith-based organizations and the solidarity movement? So that is from Firoza. The next question is from Majet, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, who says, truth be told, dear Reverend, it is over 70 years of occupation, not 55. And the question then is, who gave the United Nations the right to hand over land that does not belong to them? Majet also says, thank you and much appreciated. And then I think it's MX, they Snock says, please tell us more about the conference. I would assume this is the conference on that you attended. Yes, and then Ututuzile says, what is it that we as South Africans can do better to make the international community come to accepting that this is apartheid and deal with Israel in a manner that will bring a peaceful solution? So what does the average South African who understands what it's like to be on the receiving end of injustices, what can we do to motivate and influence, particularly the West, Duduzile says, on being able to identify the apartheid injustices that are taking place within Israel and Palestine? If we can start with those, and then we can move then to any questions that we might have within the room.
I'll leave the Christ at the checkpoint to my colleagues. I just want to say the question about a working committee. I think what we are saying now, this is a commitment of the three of us. We're going to have to mobilize the country and the world, that the best way is to constitute an anti-apartheid movement, which can bring together all these solidarity groups and etc. into one movement. Because if you act as individuals, it does not produce the results. We are hoping that we'll be able to get there. The anti-apartheid movement started in England, London in the 50s. And by the 80s, it was a massive international movement. And even when the US did not want to deal with the apartheid and supporting the apartheid system, they were forced by the US citizens to change. So I think that's the issue. And then on the UK, you know, this thing about UK UN, it hit me when I dealt with South Korea, North Korea, that the UN actually blessed that war. And in terms of this Palestinian problem, it's the colonizers together with the UN who handed over administrative law, we were told, and I checked it, they took it from the British. The British used to use that detention law against the Palestinians whilst they were colonizing them. And so the Israelis just adopted. What can we do better? I think I'll leave that also to my colleagues.
First, about the conference, I think somebody asked about what conference it is. The conference we attended and were invited to address is a conference that takes place every 2 years in Bethlehem on the West Bank. It is hosted by the Bethlehem Bible College, so it's a theological project. The big thing about what a part of Palestine is in many ways a theological project, particularly the theology of the church, probably the Reformed Church, theologian, a tremendous amount of legitimacy to apartheid now, and found resonance in their conscience in what they were doing. And so what Zionism does is to also enlist Christianity in the same way. Part of this, the strong support Israel has, and we watched documentaries of this while we were there in this past week, is how churches in the USA Israel have a vision of the land between the Mediterranean and the Jordan as a Jewish land. They see no future for Palestinians in that land. And so it's a religious doctrine. And so this conference seeks to deconstruct that theological myth. And it has been growing over the last, I think they've had it almost 10 successive conferences, and ever growing in its influence around the world, particularly Christians in those countries that for the most part support Israel for religious reasons. And so you have a growing sense of a theological delegitimization of the occupation. To just draw the parallels with what happened in South Africa, the end of apartheid began almost at the moment where the moral legitimacy of apartheid was an established fact, starting with the declaration by world bodies like the World Alliance of Reformed Churches. Reverend Alan Bussack made a speech in Ottawa at that conference and declaring apartheid a heresy. And from that moment on, there was among the Reformed churches that supported apartheid, a fragmentation that happened, which eventually led to apartheid looking for new forms of legitimation elsewhere. And so we believe that that conference, in that sense, in the extent that it reaches the Christian world, helps them to see Jesus for who he really is, and not as interpreted by colonists. Thank you.
Thank you, Abu Chikane. And I guess answering the question, I mean, the conference itself, part of it is to expose those who participate in it to the realities of what the checkpoint life is. And as you can hear from the theme, is because it says Christ on the checkpoint. And for those South Africans who might not really connect with the idea of a checkpoint, literally speaking, it is the requirement that if you move from one part of the country into another part of the country, remember the categories Reverend Chikane referred us to, you need a permit. You need somebody who is going to say to you, you can go to that part of the country. Now, some 4 years ago, I experienced it as an observer, but experienced it in the early hours of the morning when people are chasing to go to work. People almost filed like cattle that are going for a dip. And everybody is pushing to go through this thing into that narrow gate where somebody stands there, generally speaking, a young person who is a soldier, who now has to check who is got the right to go to the next place where they are supposed to go to work. And that experience, that humiliating experience of going through all these checkpoints. In our last visit, Babu Chikane referred to it. We were coming back from Ramallah, and we needed to rush to a conference for the conference opening. The driver who drove us went through what he knew as a checkpoint that we're supposed to go through. But when we got there, arbitrarily, the gate was closed. In a distance that we drove for whatever hour, whatever, when we thought we were a few meters away from the venue, we had to move away from that checkpoint gate and drive for another 20 kilometers or so, Bramos, to go into another point of entry, simply to get to a point where we should have just been allowed in a meter or 500 kilometers or so, we would have arrived at our venue. We drove all the way from Ramallah to that point, only to discover that the gate has been closed arbitrarily. Nobody is warned, you can't get through. So you must ask the question, what happens then to a person who comes back from whatever they're coming home back to, and their home is a mere walking distance? They now need to find another way to go back into that space. So that is the exposure, and the question is asked through that conference. How do you understand Jesus to have to live through that point? And what does that mean then for the dignity of people who go through that experience? So that has been the kind of conference that happens, and then it is linked to biblical scriptures and reflection about what it is then to live through a checkpoint. And what it is to live in a country where at best you are not seen, at worst you are disregarded. And what does that mean? What does it mean, therefore, in terms of understanding of God, in understanding of Jesus? So that is what the conference really was about. And it's a challenging conference that people can expose themselves. I'm sure some of the work that they are doing is available, I presume, on the web. And I'm sure they can be referred for people to get through that, so that people can reflect on that. What can be done for what can be done now to help in the South Africans? I'm haunted by a comment and a plea from a Palestinian Christian who said to us, everybody else has forgotten us. We are afraid that you South Africans will also forget us. I do not know how that feels to be a nation that believes that you are forgotten, to be a people that believes that you are forgotten. And perhaps part of the things that we need to begin to do is to make sure that they never feel that they are forgotten, that we do our best as South Africans to make sure that the people of Palestine don't feel that they are forgotten, that we do our best to engage with our Jewish friends, whether it is in civil society like Bethlehem, to engage with the former ambassadors, to begin to say with them, how do we make sure that Israel realizes that its best self-interests are located in a peaceful coexistence with the Palestinian people in whatever form that it will take. We leave that to them, but we need to commit. The third thing that we can do is to commit ourselves to humanize the Palestinian people, that they have been portrayed as less than human. They've been portrayed at West as barbaric and as people who live for violence. We must now find a way as South Africans to remind the world that every child born in Palestine has the same value of a child born in Sandton, born in New York, born in Havana, born in London, that every child born in Palestine has the same dreams like every other child. They want to play like every other child. They want to go out there and run without the fear of some police person stopping them. That every child wants to see the dignity of their parents. No child wants to see their father or their mother dehumanized. Every child born in Palestine has got the same hopes and dreams like every child born in Tanzania or born in Durban, because in that connection, we humanize them and realize that the dreams that they have are as legitimate as the dreams that we have, and the dreams that the Jewish children have are as legitimate as the dreams of Palestinian children have. And when we begin to that, we let the world connect with their struggle, not because they are bad people, but because they are people of dignity like all of us. And South Africans who know that experience have a particular contribution to make and remind the world that the best we can be is when we find our common humanity rather than our common fears of each other. Those are the things that I think we can begin to work with.
Can I say what the answer I had to give without consultation? I said, even if the churches and the government abandoned you, the people of South Africa will not abandon you. And the person who closed the meeting said, thank you very much for the commitment.
Thank you so much to our leaders for those responses. I'm cognizant of the time. I had said that we would not keep you longer than an hour. I know we do have some questions from within the room. May I have permission to take an extra 10 minutes and we can take those? Okay. All right. Can I ask for us to have 3 questions? Then we can close the session, but still our leaders are still here and we can still engage with them should we need to, just for the sake of the management of time. Would that be fine with everybody? Okay, wonderful. So by show of hands, okay, I'll allow you to go. Second, and any other question? Okay, so we'll take the 2 gentlemen for their questions. Can I offer you the microphone just for our listeners on Zoom?
Hello. Yes, thank you very much. I'm from MRN, the Media Review Network. And thank you very much to you 3 gentlemen for your input. And I'm hoping, Dr. Mrs. Khumalo, that we will get a copy of the. Thank you. The question I would like to answer is this conference that is being referred to, that you gentlemen attended, which sounds like a very, very important conference that it should be widened. Is it restricted to faith people? Or let me put it this way: is it restricted only to Christian people who believe in Christ, or this conference can be widened to include other faiths? That's my first question.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Ponti Muletsani from Salam Media. The team is back almost a week now. Just want to find out if there's been any interest from DECO to meet with the team just to unpack this report. And Reverend Molo mentioned that perhaps it is time to humanize the Palestinian struggle. Is this the message that you're going to be taking to the pulpit as a man of the cloth? Thank you.
Thank you. I can start with the last question. Indeed, the dignity of every human being is a kernel and interest for the proclamation of God and the proclamation of Christ. At the center of Christ is the idea that we are all created in God's image, and that image makes us reflective of God in all forms and in all ways of being children of God. So therefore, it is not necessarily a new phenomenon to think about that as a commitment. I believe that people of faith have always pursued that. What you're asking, therefore, whether the Christian church needs to have a direct and deliberate, consistent messaging of that. That's the conversation we want to have with our church leaders, so that when we give them a fuller report on this work, we can now find ways that begin to speak to us and say, how do we help? Whatever view we hold on certain things, whatever view we hold on what the solution might be, that are we able to get to that basic point that says, in God's eyes, the dignity of everyone is a reflection of God's dignity. Therefore, that's the message that we commit to communicate, and therefore how to amplify that in the continued work that we do. It's something that we are going to present to our church leaders, and our church leaders descending from God are wise enough, we believe, to find the proper ways to communicate this message as guided by God.
Well, I believe Reverend Mosentla will talk about the openness of Christ at the checkpoint. I believe they can close it, but it was started from a Christian perspective. The DERCO, we have been in contact with them before the visit, and we will be in contact with them now that we are back. And we worked at the embassy in Ramallah assisted us in many other ways. So we worked with them closely.
Oh, when you ask the question, I quickly send a text to the organizers of the conference and hoped they would answer in time, and thankfully they have. And the answer is it is open to all. So I think that's is a good thing. My sense is that we probably should take it further and say, even in this country, we work with the Evangelical Alliance of South Africa, who a couple of years ago hosted Palestinian speakers to do a conference that is similar to the Christ at the Checkpoint for the same sort of reasons, because we know that the Christian Zionism is a very, very strong movement around the world that unfortunately falls into the trap set for it by the occupation, by Israel, by Zionists, that plays with some texts wrested out of context to seem to legitimize Israel. And so too many people who have not even been to Israel just find themselves supporting Israel. It's almost natural. I used to, I came to the faith reading the scriptures, and everywhere I see David, I see a hero, and Moses, and all of these characters. And when Israel used the Star of David as their national flag, and they used those texts loosely in that way, you tend to, without thinking, knee-jerk reaction, find yourself on the side of Israel. And so to delegitimize that theology and help people see what is actually happening on the ground is a big task. And so a conference like that seems to be necessary in every country where the Christian world should seriously look at this, because it is every country that has a Christian majority is implicated in this crime of the occupation. Europe, Christian churches in Europe who are also pro-Israel, the European Union, all of those countries and the churches in those countries have to do their homework and do this conference afresh on their own and reflect on this. I think it would be a good thing for all faiths, Islam and others. All of us have to rethink the meaning of our faith in contemporary society in ways that limit those tendencies that can be abused, that can lead to, killing innocent people in pursuit for religious ends. And we've seen that on this continent a lot. So I think that every faith group would have to do some serious thought about how their faith is being used to affirm life or to destroy it.
Ma'am, is there any other question? I want to say the last thing. Yeah, I just want to say that I don't want to use my religious language. I feel that the time has come that when we return to Israel, Palestine, we should take an interfaith group. It's important because it will then impact on people differently. So you have Islamic leaders, Jewish leaders to come along. So as South Africans, we can show that we are not anti-people, but we are for life and for justice and peace. And I'm hoping that the moment will come. I tried it during the time I was General Secretary. We couldn't agree at that point. Last minute, those who were not going to go with us from the Jewish community, I think, panicked. But there are good Jewish people, South Africans generally know what justice is about. And I think we can actually be able to pull it off. Go together and meet everybody there together. So we show this cannot be a religious issue. This is not about Jews and, Arabs. This is about God's justice. It's about how you treat people. That's the real issue rather than personal. Yeah. Yeah, no, the Reverend Mosenka reminds me about the Shireen experience, which was very powerful, painful. We tried to visit the family there when we were there. Unfortunately, they were in Jordan. So it's just the wrong time, but we wanted to go and express our condolences. But her death brought together the Orthodox and the Catholic, the Islamic and Christian, Jewish, and it was actually quite extraordinary in the manner in which it impacted on people there, and they don't stop talking about it. But man, it takes somebody's death for you to do that, which is unfortunate.
Thank you so much. It's now 10 minutes past 12. I would like us to conclude then the session. Concluding the session doesn't mean the conversation is over. We do still have, there are questions online that we will make a copy of and make note of and be able to respond to as we can. And should there be any other questions from the media, my email address is accessible. It's at the bottom of all statements, and the press release will be issued shortly as we end this session. I would like to thank our panelists, Reverend Mosntla, Reverend Frank Chikane, and Reverend Zwandile Molo, who have taken the time to share such a critical issue with us, and leave you then with the onus becomes on us as the rest of South Africans, as the rest of the world, to choose to stand up and fight against the injustices and make some sort of impact in the manner that the world made an impact in South Africa. Every single effort, every single thought, every single bit of information consumed and information learned makes a difference. And that is the onus I would like to leave with everybody online and in the room. My name is Kutalani Kumalo. Thank you so much. And we appreciate all of your support. I wish you a good afternoon. Thank you.